Welcome to the next Future of Product webinar. Today's topic will be backlog size and why it matters and why we claim that there is such a thing that optimal backlog size. My name is Arto Kiiskinen. I'm an agile coach and product owner trainer in Eficode. And today I am joined with my colleague Risto. Hello.
Hi, and also welcome everybody on my behalf. I'm Risto Väretsalo, and product organization coach, colleague of Arto. And today it's very important topic. This is very interesting, and we are really in the essence of the future of the product with backlogs, because backlogs and all backlog items are actually creating the future of the product. But to get backlogs in good shape, there are often many problems to tackle, and one important aspect is this backlog size.
That is exactly so, and me and Risto, from all of my colleagues, I think that me and Risto are the most passionate about backlog and the backlog quality, and all issues regarding the backlog.
That is true, and unfortunately, my voice is a bit down today, but still, I try to speak.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Some practicalities. If you do wish to have questions during the session, please feel free to write them into the question and answer question box. I think that we should be able to see them. We will take a look at those questions at the end of the webinar. So really hoping that you would have some. It makes this a better investment for you and everybody online. We'll be talking about some backlog size related problems in the beginning, and since we were talking about an optimal backlog size, it means that backlog can be either too small compared to the optimum or too large compared to the optimum. And then we will have, during the webinar, we will have some ideas and tools and methods that you can use to then reach your optimum. So that's the agenda for today. We will start with a little bit of a funny picture that me and Risto noticed from a LinkedIn post. So Jira backlog and stuff that's actually worth doing. This was a little bit funny, but again, a little bit not so funny.
Yeah. This book on the left that looks a little bit chaotic and quite a mess. And then the book on the right that looks attractive, and I would like to, as a product owner, I would go for that one.
So this is, if I would sort of remember back from all the teams that I have been coaching, let's say 8 out of 10 teams, they have a problem of a too large backlog. So I think that it is one of the most common problems with backlogs in general is the size. And then, well, Risto, do you agree with that statement?
I agree, and I have seen that this can happen at any time during the life cycle of the team and the product, and it can already happen in the first day you start agile practices. If you use a template and you put a little bit too much information to the template, you are already in trouble from the day one. Or it can also happen as you go and you actually don't notice it. It's just you get used to it and you think that it's okay and normal to have too large backlog.
Yeah.
But there are problems that you might not be aware of.
This thing usually tends to happen over time. So over years of working with the product, the backlog then starts to grow and grow and starts to look at like the book here on the left. And also in some cases, even if the team working with the product is fresh, maybe the developers have been changed or new developers coming in, or maybe sometimes even the product owner is a new, but he has inherited this massive backlog that then slows down all the work in backlog refinement, all the work in planning and forecasting. When do these things happen, or do they happen, or do we do them? So, so keep this in mind. It's a very common problem of having too large backlog, and we'll come back to recommended backlog size in a moment. But let's first look at what a healthy backlog would look like. So healthy backlog would be, it contains all the work that the team is doing for the product. It contains the bugs to be fixed, the new functionality, refactoring activities for technical debt reduction, and also maintenance work, environment work, everything that's needed for the product. That's the purpose of the backlog. But look at the first line here, all remaining committed work. That's what I would like to outline is a healthy backlog. Healthy backlog, optimal backlog. It implies that we are going to work on it. It's not a never-ending list where we just keep collecting ideas. There is a decision, a critical decision that the product owner makes in placing work onto the backlog. And when we start to have a too large backlog, that's one of the biggest problems a too large backlog creates is if the backlog is 500 items long, 1,000 items long, 2,000 items long, if we start adding things to it, it's zero commitment unless the item is added very near the top. Anything to add, Risto? Any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I could add about these two words, this committed and work. It's a mindset, and what we mean with this committed, it doesn't mean that we have a fixed and detailed plan here in the backlog, that everything, each and every detail would be known in advance and upfront. Instead, this is adaptive plan, and the backlog items contain always some level of uncertainty.
True.
And so it's adaptive and adjusted based on learnings.
Yes. And even we use the word work, it would be better to understand the backlog as a not purely solutions. It's more thinking about the problems and the why, and then leave the solution open, because the understanding of the problem is more important than the solution right now, and solution 1 year from now might be quite different.
Yeah, and today we are not going too much detail how these backlog items look like inside, but keep in mind that the backlog is about future of the product. So each of these items creates some kind of change for the product. So don't add to backlog some meetings you have, some different company meetings and trainings and those kind of things. You need to have there only the changes to the product. That's where you will have a focused backlog.
Good point. So now let's look at the concept of the unicorn concept of optimal backlog size. Why I call it unicorn is that actually I don't believe that you ever get to a single optimal backlog size, but it's a target for you. That's why I call it the unicorn. And if we look at the first a backlog that is below the optimal size, sometimes it can be a case that that's too small backlog is a problem. And don't get me wrong, if your backlog is, for example, only 25 items long, and it is actually functional as a single source for work for the team, and it's rolling through very fast. If you have 25 items on your backlog and you, in every sprint, actually get half of them done, that's good. You have a single source small backlog. But when the small backlog becomes a problem is if it doesn't change, if it doesn't function as a single source for work, then it's a problem. And I have seen small backlogs that leak work around them so that people, the team is not actually using it as a backlog, it's using it as a wish list. So even though you have 25 items on the backlog, they are not changing because people are working on other things and not the things from the backlog. So you don't have a functional backlog in this sense. And in this case, it's often the case that the non-functional backlog tends to be too small. And then we'll look at a couple of methods how you could tackle this situation. So that's on the small end. And then if we look at the too large backlog, the problems here are that if you have too large backlog, and let me say an example, if you have 500 items or 700 items on your backlog, and if the product owner or somebody who is looking at the product and has an idea for feedback or hears something about from a customer or gets a request from some other department to do some change, what happens is if you already have a list of 700, it's so easy to just keep adding one more. What's one more in 700? 701. I don't care. You lose the sense that the acceptance of the thing to the backlog means something when you have a million things there. That's, I feel, the biggest problem that the too large backlog brings, because we all know that it's so much easier to give feedback or request a change to the product or request a new feature than it is to deliver that new feature. It's always easier to make requests, meaning that those requests are always more numerous than actual implementation. So critical responsibility for the person who is in charge of the backlog, product owner, is to make decision and prioritization which of these requests get done and which do not get done. And this decision becomes more difficult if you allow the backlog to grow to be too large. And then there are other problems with too large backlogs because backlog refinement becomes more difficult. The team is not so motivated to look at that 700 item long list. Technical minds or difficult items get buried. Important items get buried, so the prioritization is no longer correct. There is easy to create duplicate items or triplicate items when you don't anymore remember, was this there or not? Let us just create a new one. And the larger the backlog, the lower the level of commitment of the thing to be in it is. Meaning that any kind of forecasting based on the backlog, when is this going to be done? Well, it's sort of in the middle of the backlog, so probably never. And in many cases, business and the rest of the organization you are working with, they actually would want to know when something gets done, so that maybe they can tell their customers, or maybe they can make sales and marketing activities and so on. So all of these kind of things are problems when you allow the backlog to grow too large. Any ideas, Risto? You want to add something to my too large backlog rant?
Yeah, it's a very good explanation, Arto, and I just could summarize it that the product owner is not owning the product when the backlog has corrupted.
Yes, it is. When you are in this situation, it's easier to fall into one of the anti-patterns of product ownership or backlog management, which is what we call backlog secretary, meaning that product owner starts to think that her job is to write things down, to collect the feedback into the backlog. That's not the product owner's job. Product owner's job is to think about prioritization and ensure that the top of the backlog has the high priority items and be accountable for the backlog refinement. Meaning how to generate the value from the developer's effort, the optimum value. And if you allow backlog to grow, this becomes more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. And that's why we are preaching to you about it. So let's look at the optimal size. And I've been studying backlog for past few years. And then I would say that the sort of rule of thumb for backlog size, it would need to be somewhere less than 150 items long in terms of just the plain item count. And then if you think about it, second, what I usually say is that there is also a calendar time implication. So how long would it take to go through all of the backlog, to implement, to get all of them done? I would say typically between 2 to 4 months. That's the upper limit of the optimal backlog size. That said, in some situations, this is heavily influenced by your environment. So in some situations, the optimal backlog size should be smaller, and in some situations, it should be slightly larger. And it depends, and this is why I call it a unicorn. There's no one single rule that applies to everybody. And then the second question is, okay, what to do with the rest of the work that is more longer reaching? We'll come back to that, but I will be talking about having work split into roadmap, which is looking at the coming quarters and the coming years, and then backlog, which is this shorter term, higher commitment, more detailed plan in the, let's say, next 2 to maybe even 6 months in some cases. And then one aspect that affects also this optimal backlog size is the size of the organization and the level of dependencies in the product. And then also the agile scaling model that you are using, that also impacts this optimal backlog size. But when we get to this, if we now move from 700 to 150 items, and from, let's say, 2 years of work to 4 months of work, imagine the situation and the much more easier motivating the rest of the team to actually be aware, scan through, and refine each of these items that are on the backlog that we are really going to do, highly likely going to do. And imagine then the difference of of critical approval that if you then add new things to this backlog, it means that you can actually even add them to the bottom and they will get done. The commitment level and the decision of adding something to this optimal backlog is totally different to adding it to the 700 item backlog. Risto, anything to add?
Yeah, I started to think when you mentioned that adding to the bottom and it will be very likely to be done. We will look at this a bit more where we see the product owner and the stakeholders, but maybe just quickly saying that all the stakeholders start to trust you and respect you when you say that it will be there and at the bottom. They know that it will be done. Then let's say in the next 5 to 7 sprints, it will be completed. So yes. The team will be happy and focused, and the stakeholders are happy, and the customers and users are happy, ultimately.
And one more thing which will happen is we have here now this icon of shouting person on the extreme ends of it, and the shouting person is missing in the middle, in the optimal size. When you have an optimal size backlog, exactly like Risto, you said, the stakeholders trust you. They don't have to shout to prioritize. They don't have to increase the noise level of the organization to get their stuff done. Because if they get to the backlog, it means it's going to get done. And this reduced shouting, a reduced noise means less stress. And what happens when people working under less stress? They are more creative, they are more efficient, they get more stuff done, and they feel better doing it. So one more thing why we should try to keep the actual backlog part of this work optimal sized. That's what I was talking. Let's go to the next one. Why do backlogs then tend to grow? It's when you are not consciously and with good discipline doing backlog management and approval of the backlog decisions. If you start to use the backlog as wish list, let's save it. Let's save this thing so that we don't forget it. It's a totally different decision than should we do it or not? Does it get to the backlog or not? So let's not act as backlog squirrels and store our nuts for the rainy day. No, that's not what product owners should do. Everything should be a decision. Do we do it or not? Does it get to the backlog or not? And thinking, if you catch yourself thinking, okay, I should put it to the backlog so that I don't forget it. You should be thinking, what's the value of this work versus the effort? So how high priority would be compared to everything else? And let's not forget it. Backlogs also grow because sometimes the organization has not empowered the people doing the backlog management, so the product owners, to actually say no, this is a problem, and not problem that can be quickly fixed, but yeah, sometimes I have met these organizations where saying no is not a possibility. It's not really agile then. Okay, I'll come back to this size of a good backlog. So this is a little bit recap. 150 items, 2 to 6 months of work, and sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. But really, if you are above 700, above 500, I would seriously question, you probably have too many things on your backlog. If you have 1 year, year and a half, 2 years of work in your backlog, that's not a backlog anymore. That's a combination backlog roadmap.
Yeah, and different aspects impact here when you are searching or experimenting towards this optimal size for your team. Like, are you working together as a team, or are you working currently more as an individual? And how mature you are in slicing and sizing the work, and in what kind of industry you work. Are you working in software or hardware, or what kind of product organization? And then once you are becoming more and more mature in the sprints and slicing the work, you will learn how many items you typically do in a sprint. And let's say in your case, it would be 15 items roughly per sprint. And then you would have a typical this length of work for 2 months. Then one potential optimal size for you can be roughly 50 items. You have 15 items there in the sprint, and then you have 50 items. Half of those are to be refined, and half of them are unrefined, and some of those will be split, etc.
Yes, and let's remember that typically also what happens is that the backlog doesn't contain everything that you end up doing. You end up typically in sprint reviews, and as you do it, you find out, oh, we need to do this thing. Oh, we need to do this thing, and pretty fast. So, yep. Taking it maybe slightly even back from that 50 items that you stated, because you don't know what you will find out when you start doing something.
Yes.
Typically expands a little bit.
Yeah, and some of the items we learned that this one we will delete. This is.
But the factors that then increase this number is if you have some long lead time items, if you are working with maybe other departments, other teams, or third parties, you need to, even if you're committed to doing something, you need to perform certain analysis first to get the change request going into other part of the organization so that they can do what you need them to do, so that you can do eventually what the whole value generating backlog item was. So yep. That then typically tends to extend this both in calendar time and item count.
And also we have to say that there is no static number, that it's exactly this number.
Yeah. Let's next look at some of the ideas for too small backlog being a problem. And with the too small backlog, I mean that if it's not functional, if you have a 20 item backlog, it's not changing. People are still working on something, but what they work doesn't go via the backlog. It's a problem, because the whole Scrum and Agile ideology is based on backlog being the single source for the work. If your backlog is small, not functioning, not changing, it's a permission to leak work around it. And then you don't have refinement possibilities, you don't have priority control, you don't have anything. And if you don't have a functional backlog, what is the place where you store feedback, the changes? It's everywhere, because you don't have a single source for work, so your feedback evaporates, and even why there is any motivation to gather any feedback. And refinement is easier, more difficult, because what to refine, because we are not using the backlog for it. Planning and transparency. So forecasting, the work is coming from everywhere, not via the backlog. So when is something going to get done? No idea. In many organizations, it's important to be able to forecast based on the backlog. So that's why the small backlog is a problem. And what to do with the small backlog? You have to have a discipline. So you need to stop the leaking work from around it. You need to make it so that the backlog is a single source for work. So once you get that discipline in place for the team. So then you have to start improving the backlog, because now your backlog is too small, it's not functional, it doesn't contain the work that it needs to. So, okay, get out of the office, do design sprints, do product vision work, and get feedback from the customer. And also, you need to talk to a lot of people, talk to all of the stakeholders more actively, and listen to the feedback. And then do decisions how to build up the backlog to be more reasonable sized, nearer to the optimal size. So that's very quick look at the situation of too small non-functional backlog. Add discipline, no leaking work around it, single source for work, and then start on this journey of improving the backlog with more communication. But let's look at the more common problem of too large backlog, and some methods and tools, ideas how to actually then work with that situation. And here is a summary of the things that we will be looking at in a little bit more detail. So 4 places of work. So not only the roadmap, let me explain that in detail in a moment. Using product goals, product vision, and what I call goals hierarchy, the second tool. Start to be much more critical with your backlog decisions. So an automatic yes, get rid of the automatic yes. Even maybe twisting it to automatic no. We will take a look at some decision models for the backlog approval. Number 4, you need to have a regulation mechanism, regular cleaning within the backlog refinement and grooming ceremonies. This is what I call scan and plan sessions. Number 5, 4 R's method for actually cleaning the backlog. And number 6, cutting out what we call shadow backlog, which is the real backlog near the top of the enlarged, too large backlog. Let's take a look at this in detail. And the first one was 4 places of work. And let me open up what I mean, and then I'll describe why I think this is a good idea. I have here product vision. This is what the product will be looking like in maybe 5 years from now. This is product manager responsibility, typically. A guiding vision, a North Star for the product. And then based on that, typically what needs also to be done is target architecture, how this product will be built, what kind of components we will have, what kind of interfaces will we have, what kind of technologies we will be using. So what do these 2 things do? They influence the roadmaps, both the feature roadmap and technology roadmap. I've made these 2 things separate here because technology roadmap is about enablers, roadmap is about the functionality, features, the value-adding things for the product. And this can be several years of long the roadmap. And it can contain initiatives or epics or projects or features, depending on the organization. But these are typically on this epic level. They are typically not on the story or task level when they are on the roadmap. And I have drawn this as a conveyor belt here. So if you imagine it's a conveyor belt with the time as the conveyor. So it's bringing in these activities from future into our present day. And the closer to present day they come, the more we should be looking at them, testing their assumptions, testing the market need for them, testing if we can build them with our current knowledge and technologies, and adding detail to them in terms of splitting them into smaller stories. There was a very interesting post that there was 40 questions that you can ask for each of the roadmap items. So this is the realm of product management, managing the roadmap. In what order, what should we be doing so that we maximize the business benefit of the product? But if you think about this and several years of features into the product, there is a lot of variance in terms of the certainty. Are we going to do it or not? When it's year 2, 3 years into the future, these are just opportunities. They are potentials. But when they are very close to the present day, then we should be having a much higher understanding that, yes, we are probably going to do this 2 quarters from now. In the beginning of 24, this epic will be in our product. So it's much higher commitment, much lower uncertainty, meaning that when you then take a leap forward, and I'll just bring in the backlog here. Now, when this work moves from roadmap to backlog, this transition, here is where you make still another commitment leap in terms of how detailed the work understanding is, how we typically try to split the epic to stories at this point when we transition this from roadmap to backlog. And I have also now added wish list here. Wish list is another list that is zero commitment. It's just a list of interesting ideas. What I mean with these 4 places of work is that I think if you try to have all of these 4 things, wish list item, backlog item, roadmap item, technology items on the same backlog, it's very difficult to be critical or think like, does this need to be on the backlog or not? I think it's almost impossible. So if our target is that the person in charge of the backlog makes critical approval that does it get to the backlog or not, I don't see an alternative. There has to be this division of things to several places where the commitment level is very different. With backlog, the commitment level is very high. These are pretty well understood. Even only the top is refined, but they are pretty well understood. And yes, we will be most likely doing all of them. On the roadmap, the closer to present day they are, yes, the more commitment we have on them, but on the other things, no. And wish list, we are saying, yeah, these are interesting, but we have zero commitment. We don't know if we are going to do them and when. So I believe that splitting the work in this way, it becomes easier to be critical with the backlog approval and to keep the size under control. Anything to add, Risto?
Nothing, Arto.
Okay, cool. And one more comment before we move on. This is not easy because when you start to move things to backlog, roadmap, wish list, you then have to set up the sort of management process for these places of work. So you have to set up, okay, how do we manage wish list? How do we manage roadmap? How do we manage backlog? So you have to make agreements within the organization who is responsible and how you do it. I'll give some ideas for shortly. Okay, that was the first tool. The second tool that I want to talk about is goals hierarchy. We start with company vision, you know what that means. And then product vision, that's also pretty self-explanatory. Usually products have vision, although most of them are, if I may say so myself, outdated. But the next two levels of this hierarchy are not utilized enough. Almost always they are not utilized enough. Product goals. If I'm not mistaken, the product goal term was added to the Scrum Guide in the 2020 edition. I had used a similar concept in my personal work before. I called it the release vision in terms of product vision, release vision. But the product goal is the exact same thing. It's a short-term, large goal with, I would say, 3 to 6 months into the future type of time span. It's much more effective in backlog priority decision making. Because if you think about it, if you have a product goal for, let's say now until June, we have this product goal. It means you can use this product goal for priority decision making. Does it get to the backlog or not? No, it doesn't, because we only at this point add backlog the items that are contributing to product goal for June this year. We don't add anything else. So this is extremely effective tool. And then the next level, I'm sorry to say, still not used enough, sprint goals. It's been in the Scrum Guide forever. If we take a random sample of Scrum teams, I would be rich man if I would bet that they won't have sprint goals in use. So product goals and sprint goals, this goals hierarchy, the lower two levels is extremely useful in backlog priority decision making and backlog size control. Okay, next we'll take a look at the third tool, which is the product owner taking more authority in saying no and asking why. So first of all, this saying no, and then the next slide, which is my one of my favorite mantras for training new product owners, is squeeze the why. So product owners are positioned in the organization to force the people explaining the value, explaining the why of something. And then when you start asking why, when you start really digging in what's the value of this versus something else, it's one of the things how you can control backlog size. The actual picture is showing an orange. It should be a lemon, because when you start squeezing the why, it makes people cry, because I don't want to explain why. I just want you to do the work. But this is a service that the product owners offer for the rest of the organization. When they start to ask why, they force the others to explain why. It makes the value more accurate of everything that is being suggested or requested.
And the why is also the source for innovation and creativity, instead of having a ready solution, do this solution, but why makes us think, and the development teams to innovate. So it's the great source for innovation.
Exactly. I had the mantra in my last job that customers have problems, we have solutions. It's also a nice mantra to remind everybody that the backlog item should be about problem first, and then design the solution to fit the problem, and not take it for granted when somebody asks you to do something.
Yeah. And also when we analyze this why, we may also learn that actually we are not going to take this to the backlog. It was just that some stakeholder had an idea, and once we analyze it, it's no go. It's not related to the next product goals, or it's not related to the product vision.
Exactly.
Sleep overnight and think about it.
Yes.
This is not easy for product owners.
It's not easy. Yeah, it's not. You are not a friend of other people when you are start to asking why. But that's why I would say good product owners with more experience, they do this more than new product owners.
Yeah, but also for new product owners, it's just try it. And for example, one of the product owners said to me that, well, I said no to the stakeholders, and well, they have accepted it. That's fine. I explained that we have these product goals, and this is the plan we have all committed together for the next 3 months. And
yeah,
so he said that, yeah, I feel I acted like a PO. I'm a product owner. I acted like a PO.
Yeah, that's excellent. And then one more comment to that is that sometimes you don't dare doing this because you fear that other people will be angry, or you get fired, or you get overruled. Is that realistic? You are probably the best person to make these priority decisions on the backlog level. So 99% of your decisions are going to be correct. Yes, sometimes you may get overruled, but that's the exception. And then probably that was the right exception. You didn't have all the information you needed for making the call. Mm-hmm. Okay, next tool is regular cleaning of backlog. So if we think about it, it's impossible for us to arrive into a situation where we always accept into backlog as many items that we've finished gotten done. I don't think it's realistic. I think it's much more likely that even though you start to say no, you start to ask why, you start to be more critical on backlog approval, you still add too much. I think it's almost inevitable. So you need to have a ceremony where you clean stuff out. So this is and then especially if you are in a situation where you have 700 and you cleaned out 600, you're left with 100. Now you have the optimal size backlog. But if you had that problem of too large, it's very likely that this starts growing back. So you need to have a regular cleaning ceremonies in place. I suggest monthly cleaning within one of the backlog refinement sessions, which should take place regularly every week. That's my recommendation. So repurpose half of the backlog refinement with the team to clean out stuff that you probably are not going to do. And then have a second level of backlog cleaning with the maybe more stakeholder representation. So I call this backlog grooming. So here you could plan and clean backlog on a little bit higher level. So this could be every 2 months. These are my recommendations for frequency for these cleaning sessions. And then how to in practice do this cleaning. This is the 4R methods is my recommendation is, okay, when you have the scan and plan, when you have the grooming, start from bottom up, from oldest items to new items. So reverse the age order. And sometimes even based on last edits or comments. But 4Rs is remove, reprioritize, reinvent, or reduce. So you have 4 decisions possible. You either get rid of it, remove it, take it out from the backlog, reprioritize, meaning raise it up, or then you change it. So either reinvent, maybe the reason why it has lingered on the bottom of the backlog is it's actually not valuable as such. You need to change it so that it's more valuable. Or it has lingered, the final R reduce, it has lingered on the bottom of the backlog because it has been too complex as such. So many times backlog item is in the bottom because too much work compared to value. Okay, well, can we get 90% of the value with 10% of the effort? Can we make it more simpler, but still get a lot of the value out of it? Meaning that it would jump up in a priority. So these 4 R's is a good way to think when you are cleaning out. We have about maybe 5 minutes if we want to take some questions. Next is something that we maybe wanted to have it here, but don't recommend. So you could have a backlog control, size control, so that you automatically kill items that have been there for 6 months. Okay, so we didn't get up to doing it, so we kill it. This actually, yes, does achieve the size control, but it doesn't allow you to be critical in actually making the decision to add. So if you have this terminator at the end of your backlog life cycle, then you can keep adding in terms of like wish list type of approach for the backlog. And it doesn't really force you to ask why, doesn't force you to be very critical in your communication when somebody comes to suggest to you something. So that's why I don't really like it, even though this is a valid size control approach. Maybe the final tool, this shadow backlog. So this is the way to use the shadow backlog tool is that you monitor your positioning of your items into the backlog. Let's say 700 items, like again our 700 item backlog example. If you routinely position new items that you feel are really important near the top, observe where you put it. Do you put it sort of 50 items below the top, 20 items below the top, 100 items below the top? Where do you put these new items that you want to be sure are gonna get done? Voila, that's your shadow backlog on top of the 700. Now you have these 50 that are your true backlog. And the 650, they were the wish list. So now you just cut it away. Okay, take this with one comment. You probably want to cut the 650, but scan through the 650 because you don't want to maybe lose some gems in there. So yeah, cut and scan, but now you've got a true backlog at the top of the previous one. And this is a one-shot fix all, but now you should be more critical when you start adding so that you don't grow it back. So in 6 months, it's again 600 items. But that's one more tool in the toolkit of backlog size control. The scan and plan I had on the previous slide. This was the monthly repurposing of one of the backlog refinement sessions for cleaning and other things that you do in scan and plan is you scan the current backlog for items that you should perform spikes on, studies, too large stories for splitting or dependencies for other teams and so on, so that these don't creep up too high. Because if you allow these things to creep up too high, if they are now in the next sprint and you should have asked somebody else to do something, then your plan is blown out of the water. I promised some ideas for backlog approval. So here is a product owner path. So if you have a junior product owner just started and then he moves more into having more experience. I tried to collect all different decision-making approaches for backlog approval. So in the beginning, it's more about, okay, I collect all the ideas to the backlog, or I collect ideas from influential stakeholders only. And then next item may be that from my home team, either the request from home team get preference. Another valid approach is that you think in terms of, hey, I approve one item of this type, 2 items of this type, and 3 items from current big customers, and so on. So based on category, you approve things to the backlog. And let's say one of the ideas here, more enlightened ideas, start to be that you perform analysis and pros and cons for everything that you meet. And even, for example, when I was thinking how did I do this, is I used to think that I need to compare stuff to existing to backlog. So when there's a new request, okay, what seems to be the value for this? Why are we doing it? How does it compare to stuff that I have already in my backlog? And if my backlog is already the top, the well-managed, the optimal, if it compares favorably to that, it's easier to make the yes/no decision. Maybe the ultimate here is performing experiments in terms of let's say lean startup religion type of experiments. So what I'm not saying that any of these are right. I'm saying that you can have different aspects of multiple of these in your decision making. I think we're running out of time, so I'll just maybe jump to the final slide here, meaning that this was the point, the optimal size, limiting the backlog size, thinking in terms of, hey, we have a roadmap, we have a wish list, we have a backlog. Backlog is high commitment. What we tried with Risto to sort of say here is this is important. You need to think what is my optimum size, and you need to be critical in terms of accept.
Yeah, optimize your backlog to optimize that you will build the right product in the right way. And if you have too large backlog, then the backlog is owning you. And if you have too small backlog, it can be problematic. Optimize it and own the product.
Yes.
Build the right thing.
There was one question from Alan. If using a project in Jira, where would you manage the wish list? I would have the wish list as a separate Jira project. And there are obvious, it's possible to have it as a same project and use the workflow states. I would rather go with having it a separate project, or even outside of Jira in Confluence or something. So I believe that backlog needs to be in Jira, one project, wishlist a separate project or Confluence, and also roadmaps. Roadmaps are more complex. It depends on if you are using a Jira plugin or add-on for it, advanced roadmaps or big picture or any of these others. So it's case by case, but excellent question. Okay, that was it. I hope it was interesting, and I hope you got something out of it, some methods and tools for your backlog size management. I hope the unicorn concept of optimal backlog size was interesting, and I hope you got maybe a small spark to think about where you are in terms of too small, optimal, or too large. So thank you. Thank you, Risto.
Thank you, Arto, and thank you, everyone.